Okay, hello everyone. So, our presentation will be on surveillance culture and nature of privacy in contemporary America. So, with almost 4 billion people having access to the internet and using social media platforms, the world is more connected than it has ever been. This dramatic increase has allowed for major corporations to make billions of dollars without much regulation due to exploitation and misunderstanding. Everything we use these days seems to be free, but at what cost? Data collection is no joke, and since the birth of the internet in 1991, big data has found a way to implement itself into society as broadly as one can imagine. So, before we dive into any of this, some keywords need to be fully understood. First, there's privacy, which is the state or condition of being free from observation or disturbance from other people. So, why is privacy important? By having privacy, we can choose what we share publicly. I may not want people to know how much I make a year. Am I well off? Am I poor? Do I have medical issues? As you can imagine, these are oftentimes things we want to keep private. Privacy is also closely tied to freedom. As Americans, we seem to pride ourselves on the freedom we are supposedly allowed in this country. Privacy is something closely tied to the Constitution. In this document, the Constitution was written to help build the foundation for our morals and has direct measures to ensure no invasion of privacy. If you look in the Constitution, you can see the Third Amendment, which restricts quartering of soldiers in private houses by force, and the Fourth Amendment, which states no search and seizure without proper legal documents. These amendments are in place so that a citizen's privacy is never undermined. However, with new technology that has emerged in the information society, privacy has become something of the past, and these amendments seem rather outdated to the security of the nation. Security is the state of being safe. Security gives people a sense of well being related to a positive state of mental health. If you do not fear certain aspects of life, things can, in a way, be easier. With privacy being as important as it is, surveillance seems to be on the rise and has greatly affected how we view our security. Surveillance is the monitoring of behavior and activities or information for the purpose of gathering information. Surveillance is an idea that scares lots of people and has a long history in the United States. Electronic surveillance has been a part of the American life for over 150 years, starting with the use of wiretapping in the mid 1800s. The earliest statute prohibiting wiretapping came from California in 1862. In 1928, during the years of Prohibition, the Supreme Court ruled it was okay for police wiretapping. This was an idea that would continue until today. As long as this surveillance was used and is used to protect national security, it can be seen as a necessary evil. However, this is not how many Americans see the use of surveillance, and pushback has come ever since this wiretapping has occurred. After 9/11, the Patriot Act was put into place, which allowed for big surveillance, meaning free range over almost anything, in the hopes of catching terrorists. As we will talk about, people have reacted very differently to surveillance since the times of wiretapping. More recently, surveillance has taken place through the collection of data. Data, most simply put, is just a collection of facts and statistics for reference or analysis. Data is often numeric, which is also known as quantitative, and is collected through observation. We collect data to answer a question or tell a story. Data is a very broad term, and data collection has occurred for thousands of years. Even in the beginning of mankind, there were ways of storing and analyzing information. The earliest example of this is through the use of tally marks. These would represent how much of each resource a village or tribe had of any given resource. So you could map out using tally marks. I have, let's say, 6 heads of lettuce and 8 cloves of garlic. Later on, the abacus was created, and it could be used for basic mathematic problems like addition, subtraction, and multiplication. So now you can collect larger amounts of data than you could before. And in 300 BC, we see the biggest library in the world, the Library of Alexandria, which stored massive amounts of data, including 500,000 scrolls. And the invention of the library was incredibly reformative, as it gave a place for all this data to be safely stored, and from outside factors such as weather. And like we talked about earlier this class, the modern computer kind of parallel to that, but is even innovation with being able to withstand any natural occurrence. So in the late 1700s, the census was created, and this kept track of people's age, race, religion, and sex of any people in a given country, province, state, town, or city. In 1926, Nikola Tesla predicts the future by saying Earth will be converted into a huge brain through wireless technology, and that a man will one day be able to carry a telephone in his vest pocket. In the 1960s, there was lots of speculation on how the increasing amount of information would be managed and stored. So in 1965, Moore's law states that the number of transistors in a microchip doubles every year while the price cuts in half. Basically, computers get more advanced and cheaper, which is this idea of exponential growth. In the 1980s, computers are most popularly put out by IBM, Microsoft, and Apple. And in 1989, an international bestseller author foreshadows the effects of big data by speculating on the origin of his junk mail that he receives. He says, quote, "The keepers of big data say they are doing it for the consumer's benefit, but data has a way of being used for purposes other than originally intended." Once computer scientist Tom Berners-Lee announced the birth of the internet in 1991, data collection would change forever. From here, the growth is exponential. You see Amazon and Internet Explorer coming out in 1995, Google in 97, Facebook in 2004, YouTube 2005, Twitter 06, Instagram 2010, and finally Snapchat 2011. Fast forward to now, as of January 2021, according to Statista, a database company, there were 4.6 billion active internet users, which is 59.5% of the global population. Of this, 92.6%, which is 4.3 billion, access the internet via mobile devices, and 3.9 billion people use social media worldwide. So as we can see, this is a huge margin of people on mobile devices. As it can be seen, incredibly large amounts of data are produced every day. In 2021, Statista again took and analyzed what goes on in 1 minute on the internet. In 1 minute, there are 41.6 million messages sent on WhatsApp, 1.3 million voice and video calls made, 404,000 hours streamed on Netflix, and 347,000 stories posted on Instagram. As it can be seen, this is a huge amount of data. This huge amount of data is classified as big data and is, quote, so large or complex that it's difficult or impossible to process using traditional methods, end quote. Big data is seen through what are called the 5 V's: volume, velocity, variety, veracity, and value. So let's go through these. With so much data, there is a large volume that needs to be processed. Data streams at incredibly fast speeds and needs to be processed and handled very quickly. This is velocity. Data comes in many formats or varieties, like structured numeric data and unstructured data. Data flows are always changing and unpredictable, but need to be reactive to present situations. An example could be a company needing to know what is trending on social media right now. This data must be accurate and trustworthy, which is also known as veracity. Finally, analyzing this data will be beneficial for whatever reason, therefore has value, which is our last V. And so this may seem a little complex, so I will break it down further. Let's think about all the data a hospital generates. Not only is there an enormous amount, but it is very, very important as it pertains directly to people's lives. So let's go through the 5 V's and how this would work through a hospital. So first, like it stated, there are huge amounts of data that are collected throughout the hospital. So the hospital, therefore, has a large volume of data. Now think of velocity. These data are things like patient records and test results. This data needs to be organized and processed at an incredibly quick speed to keep up with constant emergencies that occur. So that would be the velocity. Then there is a large variety of data being produced as well. Structured data could be an Excel record, semi-structured data could be log files, and an X-ray image could be unstructured data. Now think of veracity. The data the hospital has to organize is very important, and it could be life-threatening if the information is inaccurate. Therefore, the data must be accurate and trustworthy, and it must also be able to quickly update and change. Finally, there's obviously lots of value for this information as it can help in many things like disease detection and better treatment. Now, big data is an obviously very broad term and has many uses. Big data is used by companies to personalize ads to you. You may look up online, can I feed my dog blueberries? And 10 minutes later, when you are reading an article, an ad for dog leashes pops up. When you pull out your phone and navigate to the grocery store, your phone tells you the exact time it will take to get there. Big data can create a live map updated by the second. This greatly comes in handy with self-driving cars. And as it can be imagined, this new technology can be used for lots of good and bad. Many argue the use of big data invades privacy and surveillance. And it brings me back to the question, everything is free, but at what cost? You know those updates you guys get on your phones? They give you the average screen time you take per week on your phone, and you click it and it tells you which apps you've been on and for how long. It says Instagram 4 hours a day, Snapchat 3 hours a day, and TikTok 2 hours a day. And then you have that hour of miscellaneous section like Safari in which you look up whatever. And whether or not this is a productive use of 10 hours is besides the point. Just from these hours alone, there has been copious amounts of data collected on you to the point where it can be sold. Ads can be generated towards you, and whether we like it or not, algorithms can determine certain traits about you as a person, which brings us to our next section, commodification of data.
So now we're going to be talking about data as a commodity. We have seen a very large shift in economic power and source of economic value from the rise of big data. Now that we understand what data is, it's time to understand why companies and organizations are so interested in it. Why is it even worth it for them to collect it? Well, part of it has to do with the copious amounts of data that is almost completely at their disposal. Every day, humans collectively produce about 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. This is a lot of data. To put this into perspective, this amount of data could be stored in about 10 million Blu-ray discs. If you were to stack them all on top of each other, they would equate to the height of 4 Eiffel Towers. On top of that, 90% of the world's data has only been from the past 2 years. Online data is only growing exponentially and will most likely continue to do so. How can we tell? Well, in 1992, 100 gigabytes of data was produced online per day. Fast forward to 2018, where 50,000 gigabytes of data was produced online per second. This growing and endless amount of data has now become a commodity for many online businesses and social media. Commodification is a process of making things exchangeable on markets, either actually and or discursively by framing things as if they were exchangeable. And these companies and organizations have definitely created a market out of all our data. So what data is actually being sought after by these companies? An area they are particularly interested in is your personal data. Personal data can be classified as data revealing racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious or philosophical beliefs, trade union membership, the process of genetic data, biometric data for the purpose of uniquely identifying a natural person, data concerning health, or data concerning a natural person's sex life or sexual orientation. Well, it turns out that personal information can lead to an increase in profit for online companies. With the top 15 internet sites worldwide, which together attract a very significant share of the global internet population, only one website is not commercial and has no advertising. This website is none other than Wikipedia. In turn for not running advertisements, Wikipedia has to ask its users for donations in order to continue to run the way it is. This goes to show that companies must rely on advertisements in order to remain functional. But how good is an advertisement if it's not generating a lot of clicks and leading to purchases? Well, this is where your personal data comes in. Instead of simply showing the same advertisements to everyone who visits a given website, companies are now personalizing their advertisements based on the data that has been collected from you. For example, Facebook is known to assign users different ad preferences based on their online activity within the social network. Advertisers are able to target a specific group of people that have been assigned a certain ad preference based off their personal data. Some of these ad preferences may suggest political opinion, sexual orientation, personal health issues, and other potentially sensitive attributes. So, do you notice any connections? The advertisements almost align exactly with your personal information that is being collected. This is crucial not just for Facebook, but many online companies that rely on advertisements. To put this into perspective, 99% of Facebook's $55.8 billion in revenue in 2018 came from advertisements. These personalized advertisements have led to greater increases in gains compared to advertisements that were displayed to all user traffic on a website. Research conducted at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology shows that companies that use data-directed decision-making enjoyed a 5 to 6% increase in productivity. The proof is in the numbers that personal data is a newfound source of opportunity for companies. This is why so many of them are scrambling to collect as much data as possible from people online. In order to keep up this growing trend of using data collection for business gains, the McKinsey Global Institute projected that the United States already needs 140,000 to 190,000 more workers with deep analytical expertise and 1.5 million more data literate managers. So the world has its eyes on data. Many companies and services are looking for ways to use this data to make money. But advertisements are not the only way they have found use in your data. Data collection has been utilized in all sorts of sectors in your everyday life. One of these sectors is the entertainment industry. Streaming services have been on the rise and have created different ways to keep you interested in continually streaming. For example, Pandora is one of the most popular streaming services there is. Pandora personalizes its users' experience through its Music Genome Project. It is self-described as the most comprehensive analysis of music ever undertaken. Additionally, Spotify, another very popular streaming service, also offers its users with personalized weekly playlists. Both of these systems of personalized music are based on your streaming habits, which are collected by these streaming services. What songs you listen to, how long you listen to them, and when you are listening to them. These are all factors that go into the personalization of your music by these services. Movie and television streaming services also work in a similar way. Streaming services such as Netflix collect data in order to constantly recommend something for you to watch. These recommendations are not just based on your own personal watching habits, but they are actually created by analyzing the data of all Netflix users in order to recommend something that they will actually be watching. This method of collecting data in order to have insight on what people want to watch is actually what's led to the creation of Netflix original shows such as Stranger Things due to the demand for original content. Another area in which data is becoming a commodity is the education and career sector. Many universities and colleges are now moving into a phase of data collection in order to attract students who would help the institution meet its internal goals. For example, many schools want to have a high rate of enrollment from admitted students as well as high graduation rates. With new methods of data collection, schools are able to predict which students will be successful at their institutions. This is the case for Ithaca College, for example, who is known to look through social media information of those who apply. Employees are also utilizing similar data collection techniques in their process of hiring potential candidates. What they do is that they will rely on services that aggregate large amounts of data to find candidates that will predictively excel in a particular work field. Some of the data that they will try to analyze includes educational history, job history, languages spoken, public work samples, and behavior on social media. Another sector in which data has been commodified is the news and information sector. How you consume news is now also based on collecting and analyzing data. One of the ways this is done is through reporters looking through social media in order to determine what kind of stories they should write. Social media such as Twitter allow for everyday people to report on news events in real time. Reporters can utilize this and create stories with even more accuracy that would otherwise have to be from in-person interviews. Another way data affects the news sectors is the way it determines how you receive your news. Big data is utilized to populate your various media timelines with news stories that have been determined to be of either higher importance to you or particular interest to you. Automated data processes also determine the most talked about stories and usually push those to the front of news aggregators or social media sites. This process of personalizing what news you see, along with pushing the most popular stories to the front, is what ensures that these news companies get as many views and clicks as possible. Data has also become a hot commodity for companies that are in the travel sector. In order to maximize the amount of money airline companies can make, they have utilized the collection and analysis of big data to alter the entire process of traveling. As soon as someone starts looking for a plane ticket, there are multiple factors that are affected by this new method. For example, fares are set the way they are based on automated data collection and analysis. Flight schedules are created with information in mind from the collection and analysis of data. Airlines are also collecting data at the individual level and looking for how frequently you fly, what you order, and other information to make flights more personalized. So now that we understand that by commodifying data, companies have been able to profit and grow their businesses to a new extent that has never been seen before. But what else do these companies gain? Well, they gain power. Now let me walk you through this so you're able to understand what I mean. People who use online services are consumers because they are actively consuming the service. As we have just discussed, the services are collecting data and using it to make more of a profit. Thus, consumers are also producing what is being commodified. This makes them prosumers. The profits that are being made from this process help sustain and even widen a basal power inequality between the owners of internet services and the prosumer. This way, they are accumulating financial power. According to the Forbes World Billionaires list of 2013, there are 7 billionaires among the world's 75 richest individuals who can be directly connected to the top 15 websites that I mentioned before. Mark Zuckerberg, the founder, chief executive officer, and main stockholder of Facebook, is one of these individuals. In order to exercise some of their power, owners of online services are afforded expensive technology, such as energy spending server parks, and buy labor power, such as talented programmers, who maintain and constantly develop the software for the network. They can also buy products that are either in competition with them or can complement their current service or product. Doing so, they are maintaining their economic power and continuing to profit off the average consumer. I mentioned Mark Zuckerberg because fairly recently he stated that the age of privacy is now over. Considering his economic power and power as a founder of one of the most popular social network sites ever made, this statement is something to be considered when continuing to think about big data and the collection of such data in a world where it has now become a commodity.
So, seeing how profitable and how essential big data is for big tech companies, it's obvious that our personal information is not so personal anymore in this digital age that we are living in. As we mentioned earlier, privacy is a crucial aspect of life, so it is important to look at people's understandings of the concepts of privacy and digital privacy. A survey conducted in 2019 asked Americans for their definitions of the words privacy and digital privacy. Here are the results. 28% of respondents defined privacy as other people and organizations not being able to access their possessions of private life. 26% of respondents defined it as control over information, possessions, and themselves, deciding what's accessible to others. When asked what digital privacy meant to them, 17% of respondents believed that it meant themselves, their personal information and possessions, the desire to keep things to themselves. 14% said that they defined it as control over information, possessions, and themselves, deciding what aspects of their lives are accessible to others. So when it comes to these definitions, we notice a few recurring themes. Across both questions, people mentioned their concerns about a third party like hackers or big tech companies obtaining their personal information, their desire to shield their personal activities and possessions, and their interest in controlling who is given access to their personal information. So just based off of people's understandings of privacy and digital privacy, we can infer that there is a great deal of concern when it comes to people's personal information in this non-private digital world. Here's what studies have found about people's concerns. More than 8 in 10 Americans are concerned about the amount of personal information social media sites and advertisers know about them. A majority of Americans are concerned about how their personal data is being used by companies and the government. 64% of respondents find online behavioral marketing or advertising invasive. So we understand that a majority of Americans are highly concerned about their privacy, but are they actually? There are many studies out there that seek to answer this question, and they have made some interesting findings. What we'll see is that people have a hard time protecting their privacy, even in environments where it's relatively simple to do. The first study we're going to look at focused on online shopping and how inclined users were to give personal information to online retailers for shopping rewards. What it found was that people say that they are highly concerned about their privacy being infringed, but they are willing to give away personal information for a small reward. This phenomenon became known as a privacy paradox. There was another study that was conducted about 10 years later that focused on the privacy paradox as well. This study looked a little more into depth about what users were willing to give up for rewards and how valuable these rewards were. Here are some of the key findings. So once again, people placed little value on their private information despite feeling concerned about their privacy being invaded. The study found that users value personally identifiable information related to browsing activity at about $10 USD. They also found that users value personal information related to their offline identity, which is data such as their age, gender, address, economic status, at about $36 USD. And this value does not change when the user is probed in different contexts, such as different search engines or email platforms. This is an interesting finding. Why is it that people value offline personally identifiable information more than online personally identifiable information? Well, one reason could be that there's a lack of awareness. People have an easier time giving value to their offline personal information because it is more explicit. This information is easier for people to conceptualize, while the idea of having your online data being continuously tracked in mind is a little harder for most people to understand. Some other key takeaways from the study were that the interviewees said that they were afraid that too much information about them was collected, but it wouldn't stop them from buying online. Other results revealed that users prefer to trade their personally identifiable information for monetary rewards or improved services more than trading it for additional free services or targeted advertisements. The majority of participants in the study were aware that their personally identifiable information was being collected when web browsing, and while they were okay with it being used to improve services, they were also negative that it could be monetized by service providers. These findings suggest that online privacy protection is something that people generally do not have a lot of knowledge about, even though they feel it is something that should be taken seriously. There are many ways to protect your privacy online, and what studies have shown are that for the most part, people do not do enough to maintain their privacy. Here are what studies have found regarding privacy protection strategies, or what people actively do to mitigate the collection, usage, and sharing of their personal information to protect their online privacy. So they found that people rarely to occasionally protect their online privacy. People who are more concerned about their privacy and people who have more internet skills and technical knowledge are more likely to engage in protective behavior. They also found that people most often delete cookies and browser history or decline cookies to protect their online privacy. So one study indicated that deleting cookies was the most used privacy protective measure, and the people also believed that it was the most effective. We all see those pop-ups when we go on a website that ask us if we want to allow cookies, but we probably don't know exactly what they are. Well, cookies are essentially small pieces of data that help a website remember users' information or record their browsing history. So deleting cookies does help limit online data collection through tracking. However, it does not help against all types of online tracking. Companies actually use many other tracking techniques such as flash cookies, which use Adobe's Flash Player to store information about your online browsing activities, and device fingerprinting, which is a more reliable way to track and identify devices because it works in various environments like mobile apps where companies cannot place cookies to definitively track individual devices. Some other privacy protection strategies that people use while navigating the web include using a temporary username or email address, which 25% of respondents of this particular study said that they've done. 24% of respondents said that they give inaccurate or misleading information about themselves, while 23% said that they decide not to use the website because it asks for a real name. Studies have also made some interesting findings regarding the online behavior of people who are more protective of their digital footprint as well. Here are some of the advanced measures that people who are more concerned about their digital privacy take. And as you can imagine, there are a lot less people who partake in these advanced measures. So 10% of adults in this particular study say that they have encrypted their phone calls, text messages, or email. And so when you encrypt something like your phone calls or text messages or emails, it means that that information is concealed and it's inaccessible from like any other big tech companies. The information is just locked off essentially. 9% say that they have used a service that allows them to browse the web anonymously, such as a proxy server, Tor software, or VPN. We've had a few discussions in this class about VPNs, and if you remember, they're virtual private networks, so they're used to protect your identity and browsing activity. Tor software is a tool designed to navigate the web freely and anonymously. And proxy servers are basically the middleman between users and the internet, and they're good for protecting users from malicious content.
Implications of big data and surveillance. The widespread collection of data and surveillance has had a dramatic impact on society, both drastically changing the economic and social atmosphere of the world. A good real-world example of the effects of data collection and surveillance would be the effects of big data. As explained earlier, the data we produce is extremely valuable to companies for a multitude of reasons, a fact that has led many companies to begin to push for increased engagement with their products, services, and platforms. In an effort to increase the engagement and the amount of data we produce, tech companies have begun to implement technologies in order to get us addicted to their software and platforms. One notable method of getting us addicted to software is called gamification. Gamification is the concept behind implementing certain game-like features into the design of software and applications. Gamification takes place by designing interfaces to reward frequent check-ins and appeals to the addictive nature of the human brain. For example, most apps have implemented the design choice to refresh the page or app by using a swipe down gesture. This gesture creates a positive feedback loop where users are rewarded with new content for swiping down. This gesture, in a way, becomes addictive. Another good example of the interface design that is designed with increasing engagement is sending notifications to inactive users. This generates curiosity and incentivizes users to log in and interact with the app or web page. Viewing the effects of big data through this lens produces interesting results. The gamification of online interactions for the sake of data collection has made a great number of people addicted to the internet and social media, which has had adverse psychological effects on society. A notable psychological effect would be the emergence of internet addiction. Internet addiction is a phenomenon where people become preoccupied with thoughts of using the internet and often spend an extreme amount of time online. An important distinction between high internet use and internet addiction is that those who are addicted are willing to undertake losses in exchange for extended time online. These losses can often manifest themselves in social isolation and school failure. Internet addiction can also be described as compulsive internet use, CIU for short, which has been tested to have positive relations with common mental health disorders and effects such as depression and loneliness. Gamification, however, is not the only lens to view the effects of data collection and surveillance. What is being done with our data also has important effects. For example, increased data collection has also made it easier for filter bubbles to form. Filter bubbles are described as closed online spaces where people of similar opinions can congregate. Filter bubbles ordinarily form through selective exposure, a normal human process in which people select information that is consistent with their beliefs and ignore uncomfortable information. However, big data has allowed for filter bubbles to form without the input of humans, namely through algorithms. Algorithms, usually in search engines and social media, use our data to suggest certain information to us, usually information that it suspects we would have selected for ourselves. This is problematic because it can lead to extreme polarization of people in both important and non-important areas of society, like politics. To piggyback off the idea of harmful algorithms, data collection has also made it easier for discrimination to take place in the market. Our data is used to generate a profile of our demographics and interests. This can be made up of a person's race, gender, sexual preference, etc. These demographics can then be used to market products to likely consumers. However, this marketing model can be used for discriminatory purposes. There are reports of customers marketing their products to consumers of specific races and sexualities, which limits exposure of certain products to certain demographics. This can be extremely harmful when it comes to advertising certain job, credit, housing opportunities. A relevant example being Facebook in 2019. The social media platform was accused of allowing housing, credit, and employment advertisers to target certain demographics using their targeted marketing program. Previously, advertisers were able to target an audience by gender, age, zip code, as well as the ability to filter using tags such as English as a second language, Telemundo, and disabled parking permit. These tags are argued to have been used by advertisers to inadvertently target minority groups and disabled persons. Due to a lawsuit, Facebook has agreed to remove these kinds of tags and alter the search function on the user end to be more transparent. So I've spent a lot of time on the effects of big data and collection. Widespread surveillance by the government also has a large effect on our society. Government surveillance has historically been a hot topic. A recent notable example would be the Edward Snowden controversy. Edward Snowden was a private contractor for the NSA from 2009 to 2013, who leaked information to the public regarding surveillance programs in America's government. Most notably, Snowden leaked a court order that ordered Verizon to relinquish the metadata of its users and the existence of PRISM. Now, PRISM is a data mining program that gave the American and British governments access to servers of large tech giants like Google. The court order and PRISM was argued to be too broad in scope to be legal and was considered to encroach on the rights of the public. Snowden was charged with espionage, however, and is currently hiding out in Russia for fear of persecution. Widespread surveillance, like the kinds leaked by Snowden, are important because they have a tangible effect on interactions online. For example, surveillance has been suggested to cause chilling effects. A chilling effect is the idea that people will avoid certain activities, behaviors, or topics when they know they are being surveilled and believe they may be prosecuted for engaging in said activities, behaviors, or topics. While the chilling effects of non-leak surveillance programs is incredibly hard to quantify, we do have some information on the effects of known surveillance programs. There have been multiple studies showing the effects of the Snowden controversy on the behaviors of members of the public, specifically in internet traffic to privacy-sensitive websites and the use of tools like Tor to increase the privacy of certain internet users. However, there are a lot of criticism with these studies. A much more reliable study was conducted at Berkeley, in which traffic to sensitive articles on Wikipedia was analyzed in order to identify any chilling effects of the Snowden controversy. They found that 500,000 less people viewed sensitive articles after June 2013, which was when Snowden first went public with The Guardian. And this provides support for the idea that society experiences sharp chilling effects after the discovery of surveillance, which dissipate over time. Another effect of surveillance is a reduced willingness to express minority views, a phenomenon referred to as the spiral of silence. It's suggested that the surveillance of people's behavior online impacts the desire to express minority opinions, both in person and online, especially after the Snowden controversy. To test this, a study was done by Elizabeth Stoichev, who used a self-administered survey where certain respondents were primed to government surveillance online, meaning that they were told that government surveillance was happening, right? And respondents were then shown a fictional Facebook article about US airstrikes against ISIS in Iraq, and were asked to respond with how likely they were to voice their opinion about the article and its contents online, as well as what they thought their fellow Americans would feel about the article. They found that those who were primed to surveillance were less likely to voice their opinions when they felt like they were part of a minority, except for a small outlier group. So this brings us to this big question, right? Are people blind to these effects? And the answer is unclear. People are aware that their data is being collected and sold, but there is a limited information on whether or not they understand the effects of their data. We do know, however, that people care about their data, where their data ends up, but don't necessarily understand what it's used for and the ramifications of its use. The ramifications that they are aware of are limited to personal ones, such as monetary loss or identity theft. There is some good news, though. While people may be unaware of the effects of big data and mass surveillance, at least as consequences of their data being collected, They are aware of the effects themselves. For instance, a dissertation by a student at Mid-Sweden University contains interviews of people and their perceptions of the creation of filter bubbles. Those interviewed identified personalization as a source of filter bubbles and echo chambers. However, all except one noticed any trend in how articles were presented to them. So while people know that their data can be used negatively and are able to view the negative effects of big data and surveillance, the relationship between the two has yet to be formed for a large portion of people. And so how surveillance makes us vulnerable, right? So contrary to what many believe, our data is vulnerable. All the data that is collected on us is extremely valuable and is thus prone to theft. So our data can be exposed by accident or in giant leaks of data called data breaches. And data exposed by accident is much more mundane than data breaches and can happen through risky e-commerce transactions and unsafe downloads containing spyware. Data breaches, on the other hand, happen on a much larger scale. Data breaches normally happen to large organizations with access to large amounts of data. The data being leaked could be an address, social security number, or credit card number. Theft of data, like what happens in data breaches, is usually used for financial gain. A person could use someone else's information to rack up a lot of debt or extort a person for ransom. A particularly relevant example to us would be the UC data breach of 2021, where perpetrators exploited a vulnerability in a UC system to gain access to information, some of which was leaked on the internet. This data included social security numbers, bank information, addresses, and phone numbers of past and present employees and students. And fraud or crimes committed with this kind of data can be extremely damaging and have long-lasting effects, which is something we're going to cover next.
And with these points made, we claim that we have entered a state where the same technology that provides seamless ease also makes users particularly vulnerable. And these vulnerabilities are not only reflected in the consequences people experience, but also the ways in which data collection and surveillance continue to shape realities that we encounter daily. In addition, data collection and surveillance culture have come to impact a plethora of everyday activities, from how long we want to stare at our screens to the policies being implemented in our communities, further cementing this topic as one everyone should truly care about. When people think about surveillance culture, not many consider the ways in which we cannot help but participate. The notion is immediately assigned a negative connotation, and yet, though privacy is desired, or at least negotiated in many cases, we simultaneously utilize surveillance ourselves. We understandably do this to monitor other road users, keep tabs on our properties, and check on our children. This is not to mention the degree to which people have fallen fond of putting more of themselves on public platforms. The immense popularity of social media says that we want to stay updated with others while maintaining an upkept image of ourselves. Because we've come to use online domains for professional, educational, utility, and personal use, and therefore more information is just out there, we have less control over our reputations. We live in a time where someone can completely research someone else and probably even come to preconceived conclusions without the researchee even knowing. In other words, so much information associated with us remains out there and exists without exclusive personal access or control over who views it or what they may be doing with their information. Also, app and software designers have taken new shifts, prompting users into allowing their data to be collected. This means that software designers completely deny access to features or disable a full, sleek experience for the user had they not accepted terms of use. And these quote unquote terms of use are essentially mini contracts, and with the push of a button, acceptance waves away layers of digital privacy. This is in reference to those visually inconvenient text boxes that blare whenever you're trying to read articles, though in many cases you can opt to not dismiss the message and therefore maintain a higher degree of digital data privacy. You'd be doing so at the expense of an easier, more seamless experience, prompting plenty to sell their privacy for such convenience. And these are choices that companies have begun to bestow upon users at seemingly every turn. Next, entertainment and media outputs have become largely predetermined. The ads we encounter watching YouTube videos or scrolling through Amazon are based on algorithms that show us more of what we consume. And this is nothing new, but while this may rub off as convenient, it essentially puts users in suggestive bubbles that can hinder and or terminally intrude any organic thought. For example, Netflix and Hulu both use data-based metrics to see which content to produce, in turn resulting in what kinds of media we are able to consume later on. In these ways, we can see the predicated loops that are literally promoted for us to consume and rely on. Simply, it's a redundant circular process that can limit exposure to everything else that can potentially be out there for us to consume and experience. This is a demonstration of how data collection can lead to reinforcements of personal echo chambers. Additionally, this quote by David Blee reveals another drawback of these programs: data reliability. He states, "The problem with predictive models is the models themselves. If they include fraud, bias, etc., they can yield very bad answers." Through this quote, we can understand how not all data can be assigned equal validity, but such is done in this system. Therefore, companies that live by data can die by it too, revealing a vital kink in a very interconnected, forecast-heavy system that remains in touch with all of us, and there's no telling how inaccuracies can scale. To be more practical, public agencies such as police departments and county services have employed data and data-based findings in designing new policies and procedures to be implemented in our communities. An example would be in Virginia in 2013. Policymakers decided to create a data sharing system between nonprofits and human services agencies, making it functionally possible to end veteran homelessness in the state. The operation has only expanded since its launch, inviting more organizations to participate in the processes of data collection and data sharing. This is an instance where data strategically connected and analyzed was materialized through different sectors explicitly affecting a designated population in a designated area. These events indirectly contribute to the impacts that data collection has had on countless facets of our lives and our environments. To a higher, more extreme degree, some scholars have argued for smart governance, claiming that public administration would be best guided through primarily data-based decisions and not in reaction to the live changes in our social environments. In this event, people crown data as king, synonymous with efficiency. However, in the case of smart governance, we can see what Kevin D. Haggerty discussed as surveillance assemblage, meaning that people would be abstracted from their human bodies and simplified to a series of tendencies via virtual data doubles. Decisions will be made using the premise of previous action, reducing humans to behavioral patterns and dismissing an entirety of factors that contribute to the lives we go about living. There has also been a discussion about how data-based algorithms potentially reinforce discrimination and other societal injustices. And though some good has come out of closer research, it seems implausible to absolutely rely on these formulations. But in contrast, organizations including the Human Rights Watch have worked together to propose legislation to terminate bulk data collection while improving transparency around surveillance in the United States as recently as 2020. But it should be noted that this is not a new fight. In the past, numerous civil rights groups such as the NAACP and the National Council of La Raza have taken stands against widespread data usage in law enforcement, hiring, and commerce. Not only does this show the uphill nature of this movement, but the persistence needed to maintain a loud perpetrator-like position in regard to the legal loopholes around data collection. This demonstrates active awareness around surveillance culture and data collection, calling for change. These organizations are smaller representations of a bigger movement against the current state of these issues and pursuits to combat them, parallel to their continued and arguably wrongful development. Lastly, and on another note, database research has also resulted in significant contributions on a number of fronts that should be touched upon. For starters, navigation intelligence has skyrocketed as a result of GPS usage. This has made for more calculated travels and navigation systems, putting more advanced tools into the hands of everyday people. These services are generally accessible, allowing most to maneuver more effectively, given these advancements. Next, there's been a lot of healthcare advancements. This is a big one. Data collection has allowed for major progressions in the health field, namely improvements in healthcare transport systems, contributions to biomedical research, the creation/study of NGA-based data, and more structured clinical decision-making, allowing for the everyday doctor's visit to be more efficient in time, space, and even cost. This last point highlights disaster preparation and response. Without the extensive quantitative research made available by data-based approaches to these events, researchers would be unable to identify the optimal response procedures that can eventually lead to the saving of many lives. Through a case study of Indonesia and their specific disaster vulnerabilities, it can be seen that improvements in information and data technologies contribute to better outcomes in times of natural disasters. Much of Indonesia's disaster vulnerability existed due to Indonesia's lack of technological application in areas that would be affected. Available data and media platforms present opportunities to strengthen capacity to gather information and better respond in natural disasters. This leads one to the notion that investing in these technologies is essentially investing in the mitigation of disaster impacts.
So throughout the lecture so far, it's become clear that there are many challenges to overcome regarding our digital safety. So in this portion of the lecture, we will discuss what can be done to create a better future. As we discuss the downfalls and dangers that come from data collection and big data, there are benefits of looking at the topic from a global perspective that could help us achieve better information protection for individuals. So at this time, the United States is considered to have weak data protection legislation, given that there does not currently exist a nationwide policy on data protection. In comparison to that, other countries that are known for having strong data protection are the European Union, Argentina, Switzerland, Canada, and Australia, to name a few. In order to gain a perspective on how other nations are approaching the issue of data security and privacy, we will look closer at two of the policies that are considered to offer citizens the best protection. And these are the European Union's GDPR and Canada's PIPEDA. So to start, the European Union's most recent 2016 General Data Protection Regulation is meant to protect people's personal information. This includes any information that can be used to identify someone, such as their name, location, gender, or ethnicity, anything of that sort. And in order for companies to be able to collect data, they actually have to meet a thoroughly documented set of requirements to prove why they actually need it. Additionally, there are also guidelines for how long they can keep that information once they've been able to collect it. So Article 17 of the document is titled The Right to Erasure, or also known as the right to be forgotten. This section states that once the data has fulfilled the purpose for which it was collected, it must be erased. So in other words, businesses are not entitled to store your personal information indefinitely. These limitations promote safety for users because they only consent to their data being used for a specific purpose. One unique element of the document is that within the GDPR subject matter and objectives, it reads, "This regulation protects fundamental rights and freedoms of natural persons, and in particular, the right to the protection of personal data." By establishing this as a fundamental right that all of those under the European Union are entitled to, the responsibility is rightfully placed on the governing body to ensure that the individual's data and personal information be protected. And through this approach, those under the GDPR can rest assured that efforts will be made to ensure the privacy and security of their personal information. So Canada has implemented similar legislation, namely the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. So under PIPEDA, businesses are expected to follow guidelines that are pretty similar to the GDPRs, and that's because the two documents share the same goal of regulating the who, what, where, and why of personal data. So there are 10 principles that businesses have to follow under PIPEDA. These are accountability, identifying purposes, consent, limiting collection, limiting use, disclosure, and retention, accuracy, safeguards, openness, individual access, and challenging compliance. And each of these principles is thoroughly explained within the document so that businesses know exactly what the requirements that they have to meet are. As previously discussed in this lecture in a different portion, one of the bigger issues in the US is people don't understand what information they're consenting to release. It's not really made clear to them. And so PIPEDA neutralizes this issue by making sure that informed consent is practiced. So people whose data is being collected must know why and what information is being collected for. So for example, the third principle, as I mentioned, of PIPEDA is consent. And this is discussed at length to make sure that all businesses know what the requirements are for the principle. And so part of the principle of consent reads, to make consent meaningful, people must understand what they are consenting to. It is only considered valid if customers understand the nature, purpose, and consequences of the collection, use, or disclosure of their personal information. And so also in PIPEDA, although it states that businesses are responsible for keeping people's information safe, there may come a time, unfortunately, that breaches do occur. And it's also stated in the document that when that does occur, people whose information has become vulnerable must be made aware of that immediately. To briefly touch on a separate technological topic that will likely become more impactful in the future, developments in artificial intelligence, or AI, are positioned to create better privacy and security for individuals and information. So technology that uses artificial intelligence exists within our daily lives more than most people realize. For example, if you have an Alexa, email spam filtering, or facial recognition on your phone, these systems are especially relevant here if you live in Isla Vista, because more businesses are starting to use payment systems that use facial recognition. For example, Pop ID can be used at Sam's to Go. And so with Pop ID, users input their image into the system when they create their account, and then they only need to stand in front of the camera at the cashier in order to pay for the meal, because the system recognizes your face as the face that you put into the account. And so although this does make paying for your meal easier in terms of information safety, it can be a bit alarming given the gravity of risk that could come from a breach. And so it's highly important that this kind of information be kept safe, and that it be discarded when someone decides to deactivate their account. On a less close to home note, some communication scholars have recently discussed the consequences that come along with AI that are actually similar to aforementioned ones regarding data. So for example, Poland attempted to implement a public employment system that would aid in decision-making. However, data was collected from users without them actually knowing that that was going on. And so the system was ultimately abandoned because social implications were underestimated. So in the future, in order to ensure better AI technological implementations, researchers hope to analyze the social environment more in depth, because since these technologies are improved through a cycle of kind of trial and error, it's really important to have informed consent maintained throughout the entire process. So to summarize, there are 4 main steps that the United States can take in the future to improve the privacy and security of an individual's personal information. The first and most important step that the US can take toward improving safety is creating a nationwide policy regarding personal data. Even though there are ones, for example, in California, it would be really most beneficial to create one that's federal at the federal level nationwide. So 2 of the elements that should be considered for adoption in the future federal data protection plan are informed consent and data storage limitations. So firstly, in both the GDPR and PIPEDA, individuals must be informed of what information is being collected, why it's being collected, and what it will be used for. This is because information that can be used to identify an individual is really important, and people should have a proper understanding of what's actually happening with that, including the risks in the case of a breach. And then secondly, limits on how long user information can be stored is a necessary step moving forward. User information should only be harbored during the duration of time stated when consent is given. And this rule gives individuals control over the usage of their own data, really. So lastly, the fourth and final step that the US can take toward safer technological experience is to increase AI safety. As AI technology continues to advance as it is, the privacy and security of everyone's information will have to be included in the thought process of AI services and personal information systems. As was shown in the Poland example earlier, unethical practices of data collection pose a danger to individuals as they're not provided adequate protection or information on what's going on with their information. So to ensure a safer future for AI, the social environmental impact should be researched thoroughly before it's introduced for the public to actually use. So through the discussion and analysis of other nations' approach to data security, data collection, and privacy of individuals' information, we can really gain a better understanding of the steps that the United States should take in the future to better protect US citizens. The GDPR and TIPIDA provide a great roadmap for nations with weaker data protection legislation to really use as a model. And so by analyzing the past, discussing the present, and speculating on the future throughout the course of this lecture, we hope to have made clear the relevance that surveillance culture and the nature of privacy in contemporary America has in all of our lives, and the importance to improve the security of our information. Thank you.